Thank you very much. And actually, I should start off by saying this, what I'm about to present today, is a condensed version. So if you expand it, that's what you get in a 3-hour workshop. And today I want to talk about something that I hear about constantly. You see the headlines all the time. You see this kind of thing, even local here in Birmingham, all the time we hear about generations. And let's be honest, most of those comments about the generations aren't always very nice, are they? Especially when it's about the younger generation. Comments like this. Sound familiar? Anyone idea when that was written?
500 BC.
Well, it's actually 340 BC, actually, but by Socrates. You're absolutely right. Not bad, 150 years out. That's pretty impressive. So the reality is this is not a new problem, but there are new problems in the workplace today. And one of the effects of generational thinking in the workplace is massive turnover. We've seen this in all of the papers, and especially at the moment where we've seen the employment squeeze taking place. Don't get me even started on quiet quitting. But if we look at the turnover in the UK today, according to Brightmind, they are saying that if you're a company of 1,000 employees in 2023, anyone like to guess what well, you can see, 14%.
14%.
Yeah, bang on, you're bang on this time. So 14%, and by the way, according to the CIPD, that's low. They're talking about in hospitality up to 41%. And the reality is, it's not what the turnover is. What's that costing organizations? And if you took an organization of 1,000 employees, that's what it's costing you. By the time you've done the recruitment, all of that lost time with onboarding, it's a very expensive process. Now, you can find lots of reports which will tell you exactly why that's happening. Constantly, we're reading about engagement. The UK has one of the lowest levels of engagement in the world. So what's going on? Well, when we look at it, we look at our generations. If we could make them stay, and especially Gen Z, we're not going to make them stay another year, 2 years, 3 years. Those days of careers for life have gone. What if you could keep that employee for just 6 more months? What would that save you as an organization? If we go back to that organization of 1,000 people, 14%, and I've done my maths with Oxford Economics and Brightmind, that would save you £800,000 a year. So there's a massive benefit in creating engagement with your teams. And Gen Z are very much a part of that. But as Stephen Covey says in his 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, his 5th habit is to be understood, first seek to understand. So let's understand the generations. Who are they? Well, there's 8 alive at the moment, 6 here, because 2, Beta were only born this year. And at the other end of the scale, you've got the greatest generation who are over 97. And in the workplace, you're talking about 4 generations, not 5, because there aren't that many octogenarians in the workplace today. So I like to frame the generations and give you an idea of who they are. And if I'm in a bigger group, I have longer time, I let you choose through Mentimeter, because one of the things we need to do today is to engage people in our audiences. So I let them have the choice. And they get to choose, do they want to be framed by Doctor Who's, Blue Peter presenters, or James Bond's? Now, the reality is that actually most people go for James Bond. So that's what we're going to go for. And let's start off with boomers. Boomers, where are you? Who's your James Bond? Sean Connery. Sean Connery is your James Bond, okay, apparently. So this generation, 61 to 79, a few things about them. They were born post-war. They were the movers and shakers of their time. My goodness me, did they change things and move things socially. But they went into a very professional environment in work, and they had to adapt accordingly. Of course, they've now been at work a long time, so they're seen sometimes as being a little less adaptable. What about the Gen Xers? Where are you? Who's your James Bond? It is, of course, Roger Moore, Mr. Eyebrow himself. This was an amazing generation. This was the generation where both parents were working. They were the latchkey kids. They were brought up in a liberal environment. When they got home, no one was there. And they were able to just look after themselves. And they fended for themselves. Some said they were even a bit feral. But they built up tremendous resilience as a result of that. The challenges in the workplace is they don't sometimes recognize that the world has changed and that younger generations might not have that same level of resilience. And therefore, they can be perceived as being a little bit direct. On to millennials. Who's yours? I love that we've got less and less and less people that we're going on. It was Pierce Brosnan. Well done. Now, Pierce Brosnan represents that generation. Now, they have got delayed milestones. They're getting married later. They're having children later. All of those major milestones for a number of different reasons, but that's affecting who they are as a generation. But also, they were the collaborative generation. This was the generation at school. They got medals for showing up. No wonder their collaboration. It's all about us together. So that's who they are. However, this was the growth of individualization. They were given a voice. They wanted to be heard. And that's why they might be perceived as sometimes being a little bit less independent. And then Gen Zs. We don't have any of them. We do. Hey! I wasn't expecting to have any Gen Z today. Who's your Bond?
Oh, it's a Daniel Craig.
Yeah, and it was Daniel Craig. This generation is unlike any other generation. They are digital natives. They grew up with these things in their DNA. They don't know a world without them. The other generations learned them. This generation knew all about it from birth. They're looking for authenticity, a word that's used so much, but actually genuinely they hold their organizations to account. Why do they question? I tell you why they question, because they've been encouraged to do that their entire lives. So they're going to carry on questioning. So when you've got all of this, you're thinking, great, that's me sorted out with the generations. But the danger is we then put all those generations into a pigeonhole. And that isn't helpful. Yes, there are things which are accurate. There are patterns. I say in my talks that we are framed by our generation, not defined by it. But there are patterns which are really valid. Yes, Gen Z are always on their phones. Shocking, isn't it? What are we going to do about it? And isn't that interesting? What Gen Z do today, we will all be doing tomorrow. And that's really important to understand because we frame things by our own upbringing. So, for example, we all have one of these in our pockets today. But some of us of a certain age forget that this is how we grew up. By the way, I'll explain later what one of those is and how to use one. But given all of that, how do we then work with different generations in the workplace? So what? What does this all mean? Well, I wanted to really understand what was going on in the workplace. So I commissioned 2 surveys, one in 2023. I interviewed 110 HR professionals. And I was looking to see how much friction is there in the workplace. Only 5% said there was friction. But what was really interesting, 66% said the lack of communication between generations was causing their organization a real problem. They were seeing low retention rates. And by the way, not just with Gen Z, but also at the other end with baby boomers as well. They were seeing recruitment problems. They were seeing issues that I posted about yesterday on LinkedIn, ghosting. They didn't even show up for interviews. So what's going on? So we got a really great insight with that. So I knew there was a problem. So then last year, I commissioned another survey. This time we interviewed 4,000 people across 6 generations, across all socioeconomic groups to find out how people thought. And in my workshops, I go into far more detail to give people some greater indication of how that works. And by the way, these are all available on my website for free. I don't do data capture. You can just have them for free. Out of this, we learned a few things. Boomers aren't technophobes. Not all of them. Some are, but not all of them. We learned that Gen Z aren't all just on their phones without actually phoning anybody. And we found out that millennials were the most perceptive when it came to body language. So there's some fascinating insights that we got there. So now we've got all of this. What do we do to bridge the generation gap? And by the way, anybody local will know that this is Black Sabbath Bridge in Broad Street. If you want to go and see it later on, you can see that's where Ozzy Osbourne's cortege went later on. But so how do we bridge that gap in our organization today? So I'm going to give you 5 tips. 5 things, takeaways, which again, in a workshop, I would spend a lot of time on them. But I'm going to give you an overview today. The first one is probably the single most important you can do, is connecting your recruitment and onboarding. Especially large organizations really struggle. They have their recruitment team over here, and then they have the onboarding team over here. Gen Z especially, if they're hearing something over here and it's not delivered over here, that's a problem. In fact, CIPD said 27% of Gen Zs are going to decide whether they're going to stay with an organization within a week, 70% within a month. You don't have the chance to get this wrong. It's so important. And that onboarding, the Deloitte have a thing called the Manual of Me, where they actually ask people, how do you like to communicate? How often do you want your feedback? And it's a great way of working so that they really engage their young people from that first day. And the second thing, when we talk about Manual of Me, is what I call personalized communication. Everywhere we go, we can have our names on Coke bottles, Toblerones, Marmite, right? I bought one for my wife with her name on it. It was brilliant. We live in a world, we think it's Gen Z. So this is sounding a bit of a rant, really, isn't it? But we all talk about Gen Z being me, 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 me. Guess what? We've all become me, 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 me. That's the way of the world today. So we need to respond to that as business leaders. So how can we personalize that communication? We need to understand that Gen Z aren't on the phones because they've got multiple platforms that they will use. They don't phone like boomers do because they do things differently. So we need to understand how they actually operate. And then when we come to different ways of communicating, think of what I call omni-channel. This is a Premier Inn. I go to all the best places. When you get to Premier Inn, you can either talk to somebody or you can do it digitally. It's up to you, or you can do it online before you even get there. What a smart thing to do. Wouldn't it be great if organizations let their teams communicate in the way they want to communicate? You're going to get so much more engagement when you do that system. And then there's another thing which is really, really fascinating. There's a lot of work into multi-generational teams. And I use the term tangle your teams. There was a study by BMW done by the Harvard Business Review where they looked at creating deliberately multi-generational teams. Their profits went up by 7% by doing it. What an extraordinary thing. Just by putting different team members together from across different generations, bringing the talent and the experience of the older generations with the youthful ideas and exciting thoughts from the young. And then you add on to that the benefit of mutual mentoring, bringing people together. Where I live in my little village in Wiltshire, I see the kids once a month all trotting off down to an old people's home that we have in our village. And you know what? You watch them together. It's amazing how they're sharing stories. And actually, we can do that in the workplace as well, just by bringing those generations together. And by having what I call a generationally cohesive workforce, we can achieve tremendous things. Remember that figure, £800,000 a year could be saved if we just engage people where they are. So here are my top tips again of the ways that I think we can bridge that generation gap, increase engagement, and create better workplaces. The first is all about that onboarding and recruitment. What are we doing to make sure we get that right? Are they connected? Then once we've done that, we need to then make sure that we're personalizing that communication. Really interesting, I was at an event with Deloitte recently and they asked a 27-year-old, what one thing could Deloitte do to make you more effective and more productive in your work? And do you know what this 27-year-old said? Humanize communication. And we all think they want it dehumanized. It's not true. The data stacks up to show that's not what they want. Think about it. They were brought up in a world where they were listened to, they were talked to, and all of a sudden they're going digital. It doesn't always stack up the way you think. Then once you've done that, then you need to look about the different channels that you're using. Some might prefer Slack, some might prefer WhatsApp, some might prefer emails. Use all channels to communicate, and you're going to get through to all of those generations. And then think about tangling your teams. Remember BMW, how effective they were in bringing those multi-generational teams together. And then finally, mutual mentoring, by learning from each other. And this can happen nationwide, who I've done some work with. We're doing this where at lunchtime they were having groups brought together of different age groups. And it's a remarkable success. AstraZeneca are doing it as well. And they're actually coming on my podcast in a few weeks' time to talk about how they're engaging with different generations and having mutual mentoring. All the results I talked about are in my book, and they're also on my website if you want them. And also you can listen to my podcast and find out more about how you can bridge that generation gap and create more engaged teams. Thank you very much. Thank you.